Well, we conclude this series today, Yigby, yes, in God's backyard. And what better way to close a series than to talk about final judgment? That'll be the great finish for all of us one day. According to Jesus, in Matthew's gospel, Matthew saved for the very last teaching of Jesus. This story in which Jesus gives us a picture of what the final judgment will be like. Now, before we jump into that story, let me acknowledge that we Methodists get a bit squeamish talking about judgment. We'd rather talk about love and mercy and kindness as if those are opposed to judgment. But what if judgment is an act of grace? Think about the relationship between a parent-child. When a child is little, what would happen if that child never heard a word of correction or consequence? Every time the child did something that could hurt the child or someone else, the parent said, "Oh, now, that's okay. Don't be upset." Or maybe they just didn't say anything at all because they don't want to hurt the child's feelings. What would become of a child like that? Kindness, mercy can be an expression of judgment as long as kindness and mercy is a part of it. Otherwise, consequences can become abuse. Judgment can become shame. Judgment and grace depend on each other. In his writing, A Reflection on the Psalms, C.S. Lewis takes note of how many times in the Psalms we read about judgment as kind of a joyous anticipation. He references verses like Psalm 35, where it says, "Judge me, O Lord my God, according to thy righteousness." Then Lewis goes on to say, the reason for this becomes very plain. The ancient Jews, like ourselves, think of God's judgment in terms of an earthly court of justice. The difference is that the Christian pictures the case to be tried as a criminal case, with yourself in the dock. But the Jew pictures it as a civil case with yourself as the plaintiff. The one hopes for acquittal, or rather pardon. The other hopes for resounding triumph with heavy damages. Hence, he prays, "Judge my quarrel, avenge my cause." Biblically speaking, judgment is a reason for hope. But hope that is more than just one day the wrongs of this world being righted or the devotion of the faithful being rewarded. It's a hope and something that will help us become the people we really want to be. With that in mind, let's think about what Jesus said about final judgment. He pictures it as all nations being gathered in front of a great throne of a king. And the king separates everyone into two groups, much like a shepherd separates sheep from the goats. And once again, Jesus uses what would have been a very familiar analogy to people of that time. Sheep and goats would often be seen grazing together, but everybody knew at the end of the day, the shepherd needed to separate those two groups. And then, as now, you don't want to be one of the goats. Kind of like we talk about goats in athletic competition. Unless you're referring to GOAT as an acronym, greatest of all time, if you're playing in a game, you don't want to be the GOAT. So you want to sing like the old children's camp song, "I don't want to be a goat." Nope. You want to be one of the sheep. I want to be a sheep. Ba, ba. as the kids would sing. Sheep were innocent. And in this case, the sheep are referred to as the righteous. Jesus gives that away when the king says, "Come and sit at my right hand." Those at the right hand are the righteous. Why? Look at what the king says to them. "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world, for I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." And because they are like sheep and they are innocent, they say, "Lord, when did we ever see you in such a condition? When?" And this is when Jesus drops the big line. Probably one of the top 5 quotes of Jesus. He said, "As you did it to one of the least of these, you did it to me." Now, there are people who know little of the Bible, if anything at all, but they know that quote. There's something about that quote that resonates within us and says, yes, that's the kind of people we want to be. That's the way religion ought to work. But it doesn't always. In fact, in too many places, religion gets in the way of people living out that ideal. And hence, you have the goats. The goats are told about the very same conditions of the king, only they didn't care for the people as the sheep did. And therefore, they hear a very different word from the king. "You who are accursed, depart from me into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angel." Did you hear when Dawn read a moment ago? She even dropped her voice for us. This is a very different message now from this king. And it seems that Jesus is talking about a very clear place. H-E double hockey sticks. That seems to be what Jesus is talking about here. And now this story becomes uncomfortable. Now we have an image of the king that doesn't feel so safe. A king who sends people to a good place or a bad place. But what if heaven and hell are not about reward and punishment? I know this is a stretch. It seems so very clear in this story. It's somewhat of a stretch, but what if heaven and hell are being described as destinations which we can reach by the choices we make in our everyday lives all the time? If there is such a place as a heaven, then that means there is an unheaven. There is a place where you will not see God's will being done. What if judgment in this story is like a warning to be aware of the direction that we're going? What if this story is meant to really help us think about the people we are becoming? So consider some of the points that Jesus clearly makes in this story. For one, we must be people who care about other people. Period. We must be people who care about all people, others, any others. This is not a story about how to get into heaven. It is a story about how to get heaven into us. So it's interesting to observe that both groups, sheep and goats, righteous, unrighteous, they're both equally surprised. They are surprised to learn that the king is found among the poor and suffering. And some cared for these people and others did not. And the righteous are the ones who cared, but they did not care because it was going to get them a reward. They cared because they care. That's it. They care because that's who they are. We are to be people who care. That's what this whole series has been about. That we would build our care for the people in God's backyard, our neighbors, especially neighbors with different needs. We've talked about caring about child and maternal health. We've talked about caring about mental health. We've talked about caring about education of all of God's children around us. Those three actually identify two of the main 4 areas of focus in our outreach ministry, which is education and health. But there are 2 other of the 4 areas in our outreach ministry, which is hunger and housing. And both of those are really big needs in our community right now. Did you know that in terms of housing, there are roughly 5,400 to 6,300 individuals in Indiana who are unhoused? And homelessness has increased most in rural areas, about 16% in recent years. Marion County alone has over 1,800 unhoused individuals. As well, we've been, each one of us, affected by the higher cost of groceries. But this is especially relevant to people who are just swimming as hard as they can at or below the poverty line. Right now in Indianapolis, 1 in 4, yes, 1 in 4 children face hunger and food insecurity. And 64,000 people lack access to nutritious food programs. An article in the news just this week reported that since October, there's been a significant increase in households with lower incomes and children who've had to start using their savings to put food on the table. And many of these households are starting to cut out meals altogether just so they can make it. Now, if all we do is talk about human needs in terms of statistics and data, we'll probably turn it into an intellectual exercise and we'll come up with answers. And that's when we'll start to divide. We'll start to find fault with each other's answers. Here's why your answers aren't going to achieve the problem. Here's why your answers aren't going to meet it. And when we do that, we probably don't do anything at all. But when we get close enough to human needs to put a face and a name to it, it does something to us. The last time I served at the Crooked Creek Food Pantry, I helped load the boxes of food into cars. People would come in a car line, usually wrapped around the parking lot and out of sight. They would pull up, open a door or a trunk, and we put the boxes of food in there. So one car pulled up, there was a man driving, a woman in the passenger seat, several children in the back seat. The trunk lid went up. I put the boxes in there, I shut the trunk, and the car started to drive off. It went no more than about 20 yards, and it stopped. And the man got out of the car and started walking toward me. I assumed he was the husband, the father, and he walked up to me, and he hugged me tight. And all he said was, "Gracias, gracias." And he went back and he got in his car. When you get close enough to a need to hug it, it does something within you. It does something that compels a response. And that is another point that we see in Jesus' story. We must care, yes, but we must care to the point of action. The righteous ones in Jesus' story, they didn't just feel empathy for the hungry, they actually fed the hungry. They didn't just have empathy for the prisoner, they visited the prisoner. They acted. The late Bishop Gerald Kennedy once made the observation about faith in action as the very heart of what it means to be holy. He observed that in the earliest periods of human history, the idea of holiness was associated with that which is sacred and sometimes taboo. He writes, holiness did not have any necessary relationship with ethics, nor was it regarded as being associated with goodness. The genius of the Old Testament prophets is nowhere more apparent than in their shifting of holiness from ceremonial to conduct. Jesus, of course, carried this process to an ultimate conclusion. Jesus paints a picture of what it means to be holy. Not because people are avoiding certain things, not because they're working to be morally pure or superior. They're holy because they're doing what Jesus would do. And that's another reason I'm very proud of our church. I believe St. Luke's doesn't want to just talk the talk, but we walk the walk. Because we care about child and maternal health, we provide a diaper distribution. We provide a place where people can come and get needs met for their children and for themselves. We care about hunger, and that's why we also serve at the Crooked Creek Food Pantry. We care about education for children, and that's why we provide and house a program called Freedom School that'll be starting in just a number of weeks. If you're fairly new to the community and you're looking for a place to get involved, those are three great places. If you just call the church, we'll put you in touch with the right person to find out how you can get plugged in. And I didn't even mention when it comes to hunger, that we also provide a daily lunch program at Fletcher Place in Fountain Square. Laura Matthews, where are you? Right back here? Lift a hand high, Laura, so folks can see you. Laura leads that with a whole team of people, and they make hundreds and hundreds of lunches to transport down to Fountain Square. And this is a group that has a great fellowship. All of these teams do. It's a great place to get plugged in and to serve. But there's also ways we can serve in other capacities. Last year, we made it known that we were encouraged to participate with other faith communities in a Streets to Home initiative with the city of Indianapolis. This is a program to help unhoused people get into safe housing. So far, over $7.8 million has been raised, and that represents 135 previously unhoused residents who now have safe housing. So far, there is a 94% success rate with people staying housed. If you want to learn more, take a picture of this website that you'll see on the screen. You can go to this part of our website that tells about the Streets to Home initiative. And when you go there, search around until you find a video by Tom Vandevender, who's sitting right down here in the front, who talks about the difference it makes to be involved in a program like this. You'll also get to read an inspiring story about Maria, a single mother who describes what it was like to be evicted with children and how easily that happens here in Indianapolis. A number of years ago, I visited Windsor Village United Methodist Church in Houston, Texas. It is our largest predominantly African American church in the denomination. While I was there, I got to go and see an entire neighborhood they built as a church called Corinthian Point. They built this on a model like Habitat for Humanity to help people who not in any other way would have a chance to get into their own homes. They have over 450 homes in Corinthian Point with a residential population of about 1,500 people. Folks, that's an entire town. And it's done by a church. And I believe St. Luke's could do the same. I believe we can be that church for the people of Indianapolis. I believe someone hearing this message right now might feel God's voice reverberating in their heart, saying, you can lead that. Who knows? But when we care enough, and we care to the point of action, lives will be changed. Neighborhoods get changed. The world gets changed. One last thought about Jesus' story. One last point that he makes. The ultimate judgment of our lives and of our world will not be who called God by the right name, no matter what our lieutenant governor says. Don't encourage me. You better not do that, you'll get me in trouble. Ultimate judgment will not be who knew the right information. It will not be who lived the most spotless lives. It will be based on our compassion for the least of these. Now, this one messes with a lot of Christians. But Jesus begins the story saying, all nations will be brought before his throne. He doesn't say all Christians will be brought before his throne. All church people will be brought before his throne. All religious people will be brought before the throne. All good, all great, all Americans. He said, all nations, everybody, every race, every religion, every irreligion, every believer, every unbeliever will be brought, and they will be separated. And who will be counted among the righteous? Those who lived with compassion in their hearts. This messes with a lot of Christians because it's a different line of judgment from what many think. If I can make getting into heaven a matter of what I believe, that's less responsibility on what I do. If I can make it about the right knowledge, it doesn't mean so much about the right behavior. And so this is a story. Yes, it's about judgment, but it's about judgment that helps us think about what direction am I going in my life and who am I becoming? But you know what? There's an even deeper point than that. And the deeper point is this. When you allow your heart to be moved to action for those in need, that is where you will find God. I hear people sometimes say to me, I'm just missing God's presence right now. I just don't feel much of God in my life right now. What can I do? And my guess is, we're not going to feel more of God by waiting and sitting until God gives us some burst of breakthrough and revelation. Jesus says, if you want to feel more of God, get close to someone in need. Get close to someone to whom you can show compassion, close enough to touch them, close enough to see the color of their eyes, to learn their name. That's how you find God. There's a story about John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist Church. Before he had a heartwarming conversion experience in which he felt the fullness of God finally in his own soul, something that led to the movement of Methodism. When he was a student at Oxford University, about 21 years old, the faith was all about your responsibility to learn and know that which you believe, to be caught up in kind of a determiner attitude of whether other people are in or out. He was kind of arrogant. One day, he was visited by a poor porter, somebody who transferred luggage for people. It was wintertime, and the porter was in a threadbare coat, and Wesley made an observation of this. He says, "You're going to freeze to death wearing that. Why don't you put on a warmer coat?" The man said, this is the only coat I have, but I thank God for it. Wesley inwardly kind of rolled his eyes. He said, "Well, when is the last time you ate?" He said, I've only had water to drink today, but I am thankful to God for it." Wesley perhaps was sensing that this can't be sincere. He said, "Well, I know that you need to get back to the place you're staying, because if you're too late, they're going to lock the door, and then what would you have to thank God for?" And the man said, "I would thank God that I've got dry stones to sleep on." Wesley said, What more do you thank God for?" He said, "I thank God that he's given me life, a heart to love him, and a desire to serve him." Wesley didn't quite know what to do with that. He gave the man a coat of his own to wear. He left him with some money so he could go and buy food. Many, many years later, Wesley wrote about that story in his journal, and he said, "I shall never forget that porter. He convinced me there is something in religion to which I am a stranger." You know what I believe was going on in that encounter? God showed up, and Wesley felt judged. Not by the man, but by God's voice encountering him in that moment. Letting him know, "I simply want to enter into your heart, and that is what you need." And when that day happened, an explosion happened, a movement happened. The Methodist movement that wasn't just about a bunch of people having a wonderful personal encounter with God that they could keep to themselves. It was about people on fire for God so that they changed the world. So that they built schools for the poor who did not have a place to go. So that they could feed the hungry and start medical clinics. And they changed London. They changed England. They changed America. They changed the world. Folks, that's who we are. And it's why we're here. And it's who we will continue to be. The yes in God's backyard. Amen.